All right, morning, guys. So we're gonna be starting the next chapter here, as I probably already have talked to you about in your Zoom meeting, unless you're watching this before your Zoom meeting, which I doubt most of you do, but maybe some of you do that. But anyway, one of the first major things we're gonna talk about in this new chapter, which is again called Urban America, because thanks to industrialization, we're seeing trade, we're seeing the building of factories, we're seeing basically things that make up what we now consider to be cities, heavily being developed at that time. So while this is going on, we're talking roughly, we're stretching basically half a century here, mid 1800s up through the early 1900s, basically. We saw huge waves of immigrants moving into the country during that time. So that's basically the two major waves of immigration that we're going to focus on. Yes, there were immigrants and colonists and stuff like long before that, right? With the Plymouth Rock, right, and the settling of the first 13 colonies and things like that. But we're not talking about that. And you guys should have already learned about that. We're talking about again, roughly right before Civil War up through again industrialization into the early 1900s. So let's just start off with this question. Even though it isn't on your note guide, did your ancestors immigrate to the United States? So, pretty much, I'd say 99% of you, unless you are full blooded Native American, meaning, right, you and your family have not come from any other part of the earth. Native Americans are native to here, America, right? But pretty much all of us, me, my parents, your parents, probably, whatever, right, came from some other part of the world and made a life here in the Americas, and right, families has stayed here ever since. Okay, so we're going to be looking at the major reasons why immigrants come to the United States, not just back then, but today as well, and also some of the problems and challenges that immigration presents to the country, and how we, dealt with them back then, and again, how we are still dealing with them today. Okay. All right, so you had two waves of immigrants in the 1800s, okay? So in the late 1890s, you had a period known as new immigration, all right? So we're talking roughly 1880s through the early 1900s is this new wave of immigration, okay? Before 1890, we're going back to like Civil War, pre-Civil War era. Obviously, people weren't moving here during the Civil War because no one wanted to be in the middle of a war. Immigration didn't pick up again until after the Civil War. So, yeah, I mean, those are roughly called your, not roughly, but they are called your old immigrants. All right, so number one, where did new immigrants generally come from? So, here, right, where am I at here? New immigrants. My thing's not working. I can't do it with my pen. Um, hmm. Guess I can't open it as a PowerPoint. All right, so the answer's right here on this slide. I'm sorry I can't write on there like I used to. For whatever reason, I can't. Let me see if this works. Nah, it's not going to work either. All right, so I have to do it this way. So new immigrants, as you see there, generally came from Eastern and Southern Europe, right? Like it says right in the middle there. Okay. Old immigrants, meaning the ones that came here pre-Civil War, roughly, our old immigrants, they came from, like you see there in the last sentence for number one, they came from Northern and Western Europe, right? So, number one, new immigrants, Eastern and Southern Europe. The second part of number one, old immigrants, Northern and Western Europe, all right? All right, so there's going to be a question, an open ended question on your next quiz asking you to give me what are called push and pull factors of immigrants. So, a push factor is something that pushes you out of your country. Like you don't want to leave your country, but because these things are hurting you or lacking, like think of Carnegie, right? Dad couldn't find work, had to leave to come here where there were still jobs, right? Those are your push factors. So just think of that. That's how I always think of it. Someone's pushing you out of your country, right? Like literally You have to leave even though you don't want to, right? Pushing you out. And then there's other things on the opposite side of that called pull factors. Pull factors are things that are generally good about a country or an area that attracts people, right? It pulls them in, right? Think of like a magnet, right? Pulls them in. So the United States had a lot of very attractive pull factors, and it just so happens that if you look at this, right, many of your pull factors are just the opposite of your push factors. So, for example, if a push factor in Scotland, like for Carnegie, was lack of available jobs, well, the pull factor here in the United States is that we have a lot of available jobs at that time, right? So you get that? All right, so pay attention. These are major reasons back then and today. People still move here for work today, even though our economy hasn't been doing as great as it, has been historically in the past. Over the past, year or two, or even if you look over the past 15 years. I know it got pretty good there. It was doing better there for a year or two, but right, came crashing down again with the whole pandemic and everything. So this is what we're getting into this whole slide here. What were some of the more popular push factors driving immigrants from their homelands and moving to the United States? So these ones, right? Lack of available jobs. We already talked about the Carnegie. A lot of places in Europe had extreme poverty. And not only extreme poverty, but basically class restrictions that if you were a certain family, you were considered to be this class in this country, and there's nothing you could do about it to get out of that. So you had basically no social mobility, right? It didn't matter in those kind of countries. It didn't matter how hard you worked or how much more educated you got. If that's what your family did and that's what they were expected to do, that's what it was, right? And that's why we value our country so much, right? You guys have freedom to pursue your own individual occupations, interests, right? A lot of countries you can't do that, right? Um, most countries in Europe held to traditional views of military service. So I don't know if you know anything about the feudal system, but basically you tied to the land also owed military service to the lord or king above you for having that land, right? Excuse me, sorry. So, yeah, in this country, or at least, yeah, back then and today, I guess, we don't force people into the military. You have a choice, and if we do have a big war, we will have a draft, right? And maybe you will be forced into the military, but we don't openly, right, just say you have to go to the military if you're going to be a citizen of this country, right? Um, High food prices. Basically, what you had happening was, how can I say this? Inflation getting really bad in a lot of parts of Europe. So people were spending, like in Italy, for example, in the 1860s, people were spending 75% of their wages just on food. Like bread costed like 300 lira or something like that. It was ridiculous. So if you're starving, obviously you have to leave. You have to, right, go somewhere to find a country or land that can provide you a steady, right, flow of food. You're not starving. Okay, so that's all the reasons there for number two. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. There's one more for number two, and this is arguably the most important one right here at the bottom, right? Religious persecution was a big one for number two, right? That's why this country was formed, guys. I hope you realize that, right? The Puritans, the Quakers, who were forced out of England by a pro-Catholic monarchy, um, and was restricting their rights and creating pro-Catholic privileges. And so anyway, point being, this country was meant for, or at least originally was intended for, religious freedom of individuals. Okay. So why is it such an easy process back then to move to the United States? Um, Basically because so many countries were having so many problems back then with their economies, with providing food to their people, that they wanted people to leave. They were like, please get out. Like, if you don't have enough food, right, you want less people in your country. That's less mouths to feed. So Back in like the 1700s, when industry was building and these European countries were becoming modern, they had bans on people leaving. Like you weren't allowed to leave. And if you did leave, you had to leave like all your money and stuff behind to make sure that you'd come back. Because back then, population sizes weren't what they are today. If you lose a large chunk of, let's say, your computer technicians, I know they didn't exist back then. I'm just giving an example of a skilled job, right? If you lose those people and you don't have a big population, you're not getting them back. So before 1860s to, 1900, that time period, a lot of European countries would not allow you to leave. All right, but because of all the problems, so this is number three, why was moving so easy? Countries were allowing people to take all of their money, all of their belongings, and actually, in a lot of cases, maybe even asking them to leave. If you can leave, please do so. We don't have enough food for you, our economy, or all the terrible stuff. Plus, you got to understand at that time, even though I don't have this as a question, we are the only democratic country in the entire world. We are the only, at that time, okay? We are the only country that does not have a single ruler or a monarch or a tyrant ruling over them. So that's the reason why we had so many freedoms, because everybody had a say in what they got. It wasn't one person sitting up on a pedestal, right, dictating what should be done for everybody else when they don't really understand what everybody else needs because they're not them, right? Get that, right? Um, so number four, what made the voyage to America difficult? So it's easy to get out of Europe, but the fact that this is number four here, the voyage to the United States was very difficult because you had to ride in steerage. And not only that, it was generally 14 days to a month long journey, depending on the weather and the tides and the currents and all those sort of things that go into sailing, right? So steerage, I don't know if you understand what these ships are like back there. They're not cruise ships. They're very small. They're wooden. There's no like electricity. There's no modern like plumbing or anything. It's gross. It's nasty. You're elbow to elbow to people on a rickety ship in the middle of the ocean for almost a month. I mean, I don't know if I could do it. I mean, for these people, they knew they'd have to do it, and people died. I mean, it wasn't uncommon. Ships would capsize and storms and stuff coming across the Atlantic. I mean, it was not, by any means of the imagination, the safest thing in the world to do. But steerage is in the very bottom of the boat. So that's where it's the most cramped, it's the smelliest, it's the hottest, it's just nasty. So yeah, if you were a poor person, that's most of the people that were making these journeys to America were. That's generally probably where you were going to be on the ship. I don't know if you guys ever seen the movie The Titanic, but when like the Irish are down in the bottom of the Titanic and it's like kind of dirty and grimy, that's kind of what steerage is. I'm trying to think of movies to give you examples. So five. Hold on before I'll come back to this in a second. But number five is right here. Okay, so immigrants made up the majority of the population in what places? Cities. Cities. I mean, you can write down these specific cities. I mean, the biggest ones, of course, New York City, because of Ellis Island, the main immigration processing center that is built in the early 1890s to avoid criminals, people with diseases, basically the same thing we do on our borders, especially the Mexican border today. We didn't build a wall. We didn't need a wall. We just simply vetted them, meaning we investigated them, we held them, we checked them, we checked their criminal backgrounds, and if they didn't have any, red flags, we let them into the country. If they did, we sent them back. I mean, that's what we've been doing. Don't understand this whole push for a wall. I mean, if there's more people flooding in the country, then put more security on the border. Like you don't need. Anyway, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. But so yeah, cities. The biggest ones being New York, Chicago, Milwaukee, Detroit, and of course that will then tie into the mafia, one of my favorite things to study, by the 1920s, but we'll come back to that later. So 6, what factors determined how well immigrants adapted? So if you're moving here from a country, all of a sudden, you probably can't speak English, right? So here's some of the things that are going to help you um, kind of settle down comfortably pretty quickly. Most immigrants, this is okay, so this is getting into number 6, okay? Most immigrants settled into ethnic neighborhoods, right? So think about this. Even Pittsburgh, if you go to Cleveland, any city has some, like Little Italy, has some sort of Chinatown, has some sort of, right, ethnic areas, right, that were settled all the way back in the 1800s by these first immigrants that were moving in here. Because if they can recreate their home country here in another land, right, it's going to make them feel more comfortable, right? It's going to help them settle in better. But the other big factors for number 6, and what I'm going to end this video on, but of course, not going to do real well in this country if you can't speak English. So the faster you can learn the language, obviously, is going to determine, right, how well you adjust as an immigrant. Developing a skill, right? If you come over with some skill that makes you more valuable than others, whether it's being, a writer, a journalist, being good, like working on machinery back then, something that gave you an edge up on other people. If you came here with money, most people didn't. They came here, they were coming here for a new start in life, but some people did. Some people did leave their countries because of the fear of war, or because they didn't like their government or their ruler at the time. So yeah, there were some wealthy people that came here. Um, your well, I can't say that for sure. If they settled with their own ethnic group, right? So if you have a support group, right, to help you when you first get here, teach you, how to adapt and those sort of things, that's obviously going to be a huge help to you as well. So that's where like these ethnic neighborhoods come in, right? All right, so I'm going to show you this though. Ellis Island, I kind of skipped over this. So before Ellis Island is built in the 1890s, you could basically just come over on a ship and just walk into the country. Like there was no real processing, or I mean, now you had to register somewhere eventually to let the country know that you're here. And that was up to you though when you wanted to do that. So yes, sometimes criminals came over here to hide from the law in Europe. Um, you had people sometimes with major diseases who would come over here and then spread it to other Americans. I mean, unknowingly, usually. I'm not saying they were coming over here and purposely doing that. But point is, the same problems that we face today. So Ellis Island was the solution to that. Um, Comes right past, right, the Statue of Liberty, through the harbor there in New York, or the bay, I guess you would say. I think it's called New York Harbor. I'm not real familiar, but right? And then you had to get off that ship and you had to wait in this huge line. I'm going to post a video for you guys and show you, but it's kind of, I think they say like 70 to 75% people living in this country now can trace their names back to that book at Ellis Island that all of these immigrants had to sign when they first entered the country. So really interesting stuff. And obviously has been a big deal in the news for the past 3 or 4 years. Due to our, ex-president and government. So anyway, I'll see you guys here in your Zoom meeting soon. Make sure you do these, all right, so you're prepared for your quiz. All right, guys.